of the MSP initiative, 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, or I'm sorry, 1 o'clock Eastern on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Today, we have a very special guest on, Mr. Steve Alexander, who has been in the industry for a while. I'm not going to date him. I'm going to let him give us his history in a second. But Steve is a good mentor for a lot of the MSPs in the industry. Today's topic, we're going to talk about the value of peer and accountability groups, which happen to be what Steve's company does today. But generally, zooming out from a community standpoint, this is the kind of time where things really, it's kind of needed, right? So, Steve, how you doing today, buddy?
Excellent, George. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate you. So, Steve, why don't you take this opportunity to, give everybody a little bit of a history lesson on your kind of professional roadmap to get to this today. You've been in the channel for a long time, so I'd love for anyone that doesn't know who you are to get a little bit of a background so they understand where you're coming from.
Sure, thanks. And now you let me tell people how old I am instead of you doing it. So I like the way you set me up for that. It's wonderful. I've been in the industry for as long as I can remember, quite honestly. My first professional endeavor in computers was in 1986, 87. Never took any PC classes in college because there were none, right? So I go back that long ago. I did take an intro to Turbo Basic, though, for those that really want to geek out on things. I took it until the first test, then I dropped it and said, I don't understand what this is. This computer thing isn't for me. And I've been in the profession since really 86 on. In 1990, went out on my own and started what I didn't understand yet was an MSP. I was providing IT services. I was providing it on a monthly recurring basis. I was providing it in a flat fee. Obviously, we didn't have ubiquitous internet. We couldn't sit in an RV and broadcast. We couldn't even sit in our office and connect. But I've been doing it. I sold the first business to a much larger company. I eventually bought out that much larger company and did it again at a different time after taking a hiatus. And, you add it all up. I've been doing this for 35 years. 8 years ago, I sold that company that I reacquired and said, twice is plenty. I'm not doing it a third time. And mostly because I realized I'm better at talking about the business side than I am about the service side, if you will. And I've done that ever since, both private consulting and peer-to-peer. As you know, I run 15 peer groups right now with MSPs from all over the US and Canada, participating and helping each other and sharing war stories and becoming accountable to each other and pushing each other to continue to grow.
So, Steve, coronavirus is pretty well entrenched at this point. We've been through it. Economy shut down and kind of got opened back up a little bit. I've been driving around the country here with, my friends from Paxade and Acronis, Lineguard, and Compliancy Group, and a bunch of other vendors, just trying to see how things are, kind of in person. The news looks a lot different than what we're seeing on the street. But I do understand the need to be careful and cautious and make sure that we're not underestimating how the ebb and flow of this thing goes. So I'd love to get an idea, like a comprehensive summary of what generally you're seeing from the guys that you're working with on a monthly basis. How are things today? Are we a little bit more stable than we were back in March? Or is there still fluidity happening where there's a lot of uncertainty?
Great question. We can now take the whole hour to talk about just that question if we'd like. It's interesting that if I look at our members, our MSPs, the most successful are growing through this. They've taken some hits, of course, but they're still growing. They're adding clients, they're adding services, they're growing their market share. They've got a diverse enough client base that they've said, yeah, we took some hits on one side, another side's growing. Right? The massive middle of the market, if you will, is pretty much unchanged. They're not necessarily growing, but they're not shrinking either. And then the smaller MSPs, I think, are where they're taking their hits and where I'm most concerned for their ability to make it through.
So just to quantify so that Everybody, because everybody has different definitions in their head. What do you consider as smaller MSP?
So if we just look at it as employee count, we can say 5 and under employees. If we look at it in revenue, those that are under $1 million, anyone that's under $1 million in total revenue, and I'd say predictable revenue mostly, but revenue nonetheless. That's where we're seeing the hits. That's where one customer can make a difference, right? And I don't know if that's what you're seeing, but that's what I'm seeing out there. I think as far as where we're at, I think it's still an unknown. I think we had the initial scare early on with shutdown and everyone going to work from home, and then the early round of layoffs that happen in bigger companies and how that's going to affect us. And of course, I like to say that it's somewhat of a false sense of security of the government assistance, the PPP, the EIDL loan, all the money that was out there that the less sophisticated business owner took as just what it felt like, a blanket. They wrapped it around themselves and they said, weather doesn't matter. I'm good for now. It's all good, right? I'm warm. I'm toasty. It feels good. I got money in the bank. I don't think we've hit the economic bottom of this personally. I think it's stable, but I don't think it's hit bottom yet, if that makes any sense. So we don't know yet what's going to happen. You're driving around the country. I just drove around the East Coast a little bit. We're seeing businesses open, certainly. We're also seeing businesses shuttered, as we go along. If you go into office parks, it's a different world. It's virtually empty, and we don't know what that means, right? If you talk to anyone in commercial real estate, they don't know what they're going to do, right?
So the guy, it's really interesting, Steve. For years, I've heard, I'm sure you've heard, that people should verticalize, right? Get into a specific specialty, get into a specific, itinerary of how you market to that group or what have you. But then when this kind of stuff hits, like hospitality got crushed, transportation got crushed, airports got crushed, anyone in the moving business, right? When it comes to, like that whole
Travel.
industry.
Anyone in travel, anyone in that's handling fitness centers or any kind of place like that. And I still think vertical makes sense, but I don't think one vertical makes sense, right? I think that's what the lesson learned here is, no matter what you think, any vertical can get hit at any point in time, right? Healthcare has done pretty well through this, of course, right? Even though local offices might have been shuttered for a short period of time, but they came back right away, right? I still think vertical makes sense, but I think specialty makes more sense than vertical, right? I think specializing and understanding the market and understanding what your strengths are as a business makes a lot more sense than verticalizing, if you will.
So a couple questions immediately have already come through, which is interesting because, again, you got a lot of background in all of these different businesses. So Brent puts a couple questions out there. First question is there an opportunity or a better opportunity for those willing to, fight through the turmoil, right? Meaning, hey, MSPs are going to go out of business. You can kind of sit and wait for those customers to get displaced and just scoop them up. Is that a realistic business strategy?
I think that remains the business strategy, right? It was the business strategy coming into this, and I think it remains. I do think that we better do a better job of picking up rocks and seeing what's underneath them when we look at a smaller MSP now, right? Because when we look at numbers, we better pay attention to the recent numbers much more closely than any business owner is going to try and do, right? When you're selling a business, it's no different than anything else, right? You feel a little bit like you're dealing with a used car salesman. Those that are been in that business, I hate to say that, but it's a little bit of, hey, look over here. Look what we did last year, right? Before COVID. Look what we did before COVID. Okay, but it is COVID. We've gone through quarantine. We're still going through some level of it. We still don't know, depending on who we believe, where we're at with it, right? It's going to get worse in the winter. It's not. It's going to get better in the winter. Who knows? The truth is we don't know what's going to happen yet, right? So I still say it's a great opportunity but you better look at the stability, long-term stability of that business. You know?
So next question from Brent, and just as important, I think. Where is the bottom? Have we reached it yet? Or is it when the loans are due, when the credit card bill comes, is that the bottom? Or are we still floating and there is more bottom to come potentially?
If I knew the answer to that, I would be worth a lot more money than I'm worth today, right? All of us. I don't think we're at bottom. But I do think that the rate of descent has slowed. So we don't know yet. You know, the joke is on November 5th, everything's going to change and it'll all go away, right? No matter who wins. You and I have had this conversation too. No matter who wins, it'll all change, right? That's been the conversation. Was that change for the better or change for the worse, right? We don't. And again, no matter who wins, I'm not sure which way that goes. I do think the reality of the economy will start to settle in right around Election Day, one way or another. And then we'll finally say, okay, now maybe politics can be removed from the question of where is the economy, right? Because it's for the average person, for us, we don't know. We're listening to the two economists, right? Many of them are driven by what's going on in the world. And that includes in the US, it's a presidential election year, right? I don't know who to believe anymore. The stock market's doing well again, right? But anyone that studies the stock market knows the stock market doing well is on the forecast of business doing well 12 to 18 months from now. Well, okay, what does that mean for the next 12 to 18 months then? Right? Well, they're projecting on 12 to 18 months from now, which is what a smart investor does. Okay, then when's bottom and how quick do we come back up, right?
Well, but to that point, right? Like historically, and we've talked about this a few times, doesn't the MSPs from an economic standpoint have a delay? Like whenever the market eventually has a problem, isn't there like a 6 to 8 months like waiting period before it ultimately gets to us?
I think that is such an interesting point, but I also think it depends on who your customers are, right? Some businesses lag, some businesses lead, right? And if I'm servicing businesses that lead, then maybe I'm going to have a better indication earlier on where things are going. If I'm servicing businesses that lag, I may not know until after the turn finally comes. Compound that with what size businesses am I servicing, right? Think about what I said about the MSP market. If I'm servicing a lot of smaller businesses, they're holding on based on the fact that they got PPP money, right? And who knows where their business really is. And now all of a sudden, one day they're going to disappear on us because they weren't being realistic about their own financial situation. A larger, more sophisticated company, they've probably already made their adjustments. They're not only their initial ones, but probably their secondary adjustments to what's going on. And no matter where the economy goes, they'll be fine. Listen, the good news is, look at the market for the stocks that are leading, right? I mean, technology stocks are doing well. So that's a good indication for us, I believe, anyway, that it's a good indication for us.
So how often are your MSP and your peer groups, or do you suggest to the MSPs and your peer groups to continue talking to their customers about their current financial situation, their forecasting, employee changes now that PPP money is out? Like, how is this a monthly conversation? Is it a quarter? Like, you almost need to be kind of careful. There's a fine line, right?
Well, there is, but again, are you operating with a plan or are you reacting, right? Think about MSPs. On the service side, the big thing, we're proactive. We're proactive about everything, right? However, as business people, they're 90% reactive. They don't forecast. They don't have a plan for account management. They don't have a plan for new business development. They react. I need to hire a salesperson. That's it. I need to get a salesperson, or I need to hire a marketing company or bring in a marketing person. They're reacting to, oh my God, I need more business. Account management, which I believe is what you're talking about, to me has been critical forever, not just now. Now it's highlighted because now going to your customer and saying, hey, just want to meet, see how you're doing. How's your business doing? What's the financial picture look like? seems a little awkward and invasive right now, right? Especially if they're not doing well, right? If they're doing well, I guess it's a different story. But if you had an account management plan that included actual budget conversations with the client throughout the year, then this conversation is actually easy. Then your account managers can actually sit down with the ownership of your MSP and say, here's my at-risk customers. I already know who my at-risk customers are because they were teetering in a bad position before this hit, versus these customers are managed well, strong management teams. They have forecasting in place. They asked me for the 3-year budget financial picture for what we're going to spend on IT, not the 12-month or the 6-month or the 3-month, but 3-year. Well, those are the customers we really want because we can work with them and plan for them. But you know, how many small businesses, MSPs or not, have a forecast in place for the next 3 years, right? And that's the key piece, is to get to that point where you're managing proactively rather than reactively to everything.
So then, to your point just there, does the 3-year, 4-year, 5-year contract, is it real? I mean, if your customer can disappear at any time, or if you're now making concessions because they're in an economic tightness and now you're trying to play some movement around, hey, let's add stuff to the back of the agreement, or let's defer some, like, is it real? Does it even count?
I've never thought the 3 to 5 year contract was all that real in a pure managed services play. So, and what I mean by pure is the copier or the document imaging companies that sold high-end equipment, they've always been in that 3 to 5 year because it's a lease of high-end equipment. And then as they got into IT, it just kept going that way, right? And they had pretty tight contracts that you couldn't get out of easily because they were used to doing that from that perspective. Listen, if I'm unhappy with somebody, I'll fight with them. I'll go to court with them. I'll tell them they're not doing any good for me, right? And I'll leave it. But in this economy, you know, I mentioned gyms before, and I have some friends that own a gym, an independent gym, about 20,000 square feet, and which opens in New York this week, actually, finally. But man, I don't know if it's good or bad. I've been using this gym privately, so it's been great for me. Now there'll be people in it. But their landlord told them right away, it's okay. We know you have no income. Here's what we'll do. Don't pay me until you can. Don't pay me until you have revenue coming in. But when you open back up again, I want to sit down and maybe redo your lease to try and recoup some of the money, or maybe just add term, right? Maybe not raise the rent, but add term to it. Now, how many MSPs are sophisticated enough to think about having that conversation with their customers right away, right? Yeah, it's a small number. You were on our town hall meetings when we had them early on. That was one of the conversations about reach out, find out where your customers are at so that you can lead the conversation rather than just wait, or at least lead the preparation so that when they reach out to you, you already know what you're willing to do for them. You already have it down. It's in writing. You're ready to go. And I think that's the biggest gotcha with running an MSP, period, right?
So because the people who are doing okay, or better than okay, maybe they're still growing and they were positioned properly, are you hearing about if they're leveraging the financial vehicles, right? Interest is at a stupid all-time low. How is anybody taking advantage of that outside of PPP or idle, as government bailouts rather than just financial, flexibility kind of thing?
I think some are. The one I can think of is we have someone that really, his focus is vertical, but it's on biosciences. So a lot of money being poured into that too right now, right? Researching vaccines and other things along those lines. So they've done it. But I still think that the big key is being involved in a conversation with your client at a business level that's sophisticated enough to be involved when they start going, what if this, what if that, so that you're actually involved. They're actually calling you and saying, hey, we're having a planning meeting to figure out where we're going next. We'd like you involved. But when you think about our industry, the mass majority of business owners in our industry started as the technical talent with no real business background, no real business training, no real business experience. That's how most people start, right? And they grow in any industry, but certainly in ours. And they grow, and some get training along the way and or learn faster than others how to actually be a business owner and a manager, and not just an entrepreneur that reacts, right? And if you're on that level, I think you're doing fine.
So a question here from Brent, since we're on this topic, perfect timing. Would a bank loan an MSP on a future forecast or promise? How do they determine your, credit worthiness, I guess?
Well, first of all, I love that you added credit worthiness, because your borrowing power and your credit rating are two different things, right? They're related, but they're two different things. We're doing evaluation for somebody right now where an employee is buying in. So, and the bank actually came to us and said, we'd like to hire you to do evaluation. We've got 2 valuations from 2 different accounting firms, but we want someone in the industry to give the valuation. I don't know yet how they're going to react. Mine will be different than what an accountant put in, because I will value the contracts differently probably than an accountant will. I'm going to look and say, hey, if the average client here has been with them 5+ years, my multiplier is going to be probably higher than an accountant would have given, who may not be looking at that the same way, right? So I don't think anyone's borrowing on hope and a prayer of what's in the future. Let's put it that way. Ever. I think banking is just too sophisticated for that.
Has the banking industry caught up to reoccurring revenue and, that whole math of, hey, I'm billing per employee, billing per endpoint. I'm not just charging for product and services. Or are they still looking at things from a cash flow analysis?
I think banks have been involved with lending money to insurance companies long before we were MSPs and looking at recurring revenue. When you say caught up, I think it took them a while to catch up to understanding that that's what IT services was about, right? And mostly because it probably took most of us that long to even explain it as we're a managed service provider. Here's what that means, right? We're all about our recurring revenue. Here's what that means. And here's the stability of that. Years ago, before I sold my last company, I got approved for my second SBA loan. And it was an approval without any property or collateral. And that's 8-9 years ago now, going on 9 years ago now. And my banker told me he didn't even know that they could do that. Like he said, I didn't know they'd ever approve without either personal guarantee or property or both, or your home if you don't have business collateral. But they did, and it was all on the strength of the business model, because they looked at the recurring revenue then. So that's 8-9 years ago that was approved.
So going to shift a little bit. Generally speaking, from your group, Brad, since you're talking to them on a regular basis, how much project revenue has disappeared, right? Like usually when you look at an MSP, like 60 to 80% of a legitimate MSP, pure play MSP is reoccurring, right? And then like the top end of their business is equipment, installation, product, consulting, whatever it is, right? Is that stuff gone? Is it flat? Is it still happening? I'm just trying to get an idea.
No, it's a great point. And I think it again follows the lines of, for the larger company, MSP with larger clients, there's still plenty of project work out there. It might be slightly different as they start to plan for maybe a total virtual environment and how they're going to change things and shift things around. Or as they plan for flex space in their office that they never wanted to have before, but now they realize we're going to go virtual and we're going to give people options of coming in instead of dedicated offices. So that project work is there. Remember, we're coming off a year in 2019 where project work was through the roof, thanks to that gift Microsoft gave the industry, right? 2 gifts really, in server and workstation, right? End of life stuff. So that was fantastic. And project work was going down this year no matter what because of that, because that ended. And I heard from a peer group member at one of the meetings towards the very tail end of 2019 who said, not only can I tell you how much project work we did in 2019, I can tell you how much of it was related to Microsoft upgrades. And I went, hallelujah. Finally, somebody that's really looking at their work that way. And she said, we have to look at it this way because that's not here next year. The other project work we expect to continue. It's dropped drastically. I think it's dropped for most people. It's dropped anywhere from 30 to 60% on where they were, which is a big number. But if they're creative and they're thinking forward with their clients, there's project work there. It's just different. Whether it's a shift to hosted environments and the work that comes with that, that's there, or a shift in how office space is being used, that's there.
Which actually brings up a great topic. I still think for a majority of the industry from an MSP standpoint, hybrid is and still is happening, right? Like 100% Amazon or 100% Azure or 100% Google Cloud or whatever your vendor of choice is. I know Microsoft's popular because of Office 365 or Microsoft 365. I still feel like a large percentage are not competent in that entire workspace being in the cloud. Am I wrong? What are you seeing?
You are 100% right. As we look at collaboration tools, whether it's Microsoft Teams or something else, right? How many MSPs are actually out there leading the charge in how to get the most out of their collaboration tools? And the truth is, most of our industry was not really banking on training as part of what their managed services were before. They should be now, even more, I believe. But I think that's where people are falling short. They're simply slapping it in and saying, here, you have Microsoft Teams, use it, right? Or maybe they're going through the basics, but they're not really driving how to open up a SharePoint, how to have shared data, how to work the security tools, how to even run an effective meeting. We don't think of it as vendors because we're doing this all day, running meetings and on Zoom and or in person and doing it. But the average MSP isn't. They're not doing it every day, other than coming to listen to us.
No, fair enough. So this brings me into two kind of diverging roads here. One, how much MSP to MSP collaboration is occurring then if the competency is missing? And then on the other part of that Y in the road, are the MSPs truly leveraging what should be the vendor MSP relationship or not?
Let's take the first one, because those entirely different questions, right? In my world, we're seeing a lot of collaboration, but it's a peer group. It's natural. They're communicating with each other anyway. We do use Microsoft Teams as a platform. So even if somebody is looking for expertise that they can't find within their peer group, they're reaching out to us and saying, can you poll the other peer groups? I'm looking for expertise. It used to be, I'm looking for geographic presence in a specific area. Now it's, I'm looking for expertise. That's where I need help. On the vendor side, and I think more importantly, the distributor side, I think most MSPs still operate in that bubble of, I don't want to give it up. I don't want to bring in my distributor. I don't want to, and they lose out because everyone out there is doing it, right? All the big distributors are providing a lot of services. We hear about it all the time, right? We hear about it more and more on the cloud side, where the MSPs don't have the expertise, and it's actually easier for a distributor to leverage their resources anywhere in the world. We can leverage our resources, right? So whether it's one of the traditional distributors or whether it's a Pax8 or someone along those lines, we're hearing more and more that our members are sharing with others that, hey, you should reach out to so-and-so because they have the expertise and they're reasonable about it and they want to help you. So hopefully we start to see more of it.
So into the, this is really interesting, the dichotomy of someone who operates in a peer or accountability group versus somebody that's still going at it at their own. I mean, there's some, listen, you're one of the prominent ones in the industry. There's a few out there. I feel like single digits are actually participating in some sort of peer accountability group in comparison to the whole, right? So to me, and again, I have an MSP. I understand the dynamic. For a long road there, I was like, hey, competition, castle mentality, stay away. I don't want to talk to you. I feel like when you run, like when pre-corona, right, when you're at events, you start having those hallway conversations and those after, peer conversations at the bar, and you start opening up saying, hey, what's working for you? What's not? I'm running into this. So I feel like peer groups is like that on steroids, right? Exponentially so. Why, like, what, when you talk to someone for the first time and say, have you ever thought about this and why you should consider doing this versus not? What do you tell them?
I always ask them what they've been involved with. And I don't say what peer groups, because most people that come to me have not been in a peer group, right? I mean, certainly some have, but for the most part, they have not. And they all point to organizations that I look at and I say, those are great organizations, but they're peer communities. They're not peer groups. And the difference to me is that hallway chat, right? You go to a big event, you see people that you now feel are friends. You've seen them for years. You've known them. You know about their kids. You're on social media. So therefore, you must know everything about them. And now you trust them because you also have 3 drinks and you're sitting at the bar, right? And even though they're in the next town over, you start sharing and you start talking about things. In a peer group, it's a whole different world because A, we're talking about it before the liquor comes out, number one. B, we're actually focusing on, no, here's why you're going to share. And oh, by the way, you're in a room with no competition. Because in our peer groups, there's no, at least geographic competition, right? You're going to have nobody in your geographic market in your group so that you can share everything. What we find is that trust factor that happens then transfers further, because now when they reach out to someone, or we have a bigger event and there happen to be 2 guys from Philly sit next to each other that are in different peer groups, they're pretty comfortable talking to each other as long as they don't get too specific, right? They're certainly not going to say, are you working with so-and-so? They're not going to go there, but they'll talk about some of the problems, right?
So like, are we how deep, like, I assume there's some sort of NDA between people in their peer group. I assume they're cracking open books. They're talking about profitability. They're talking about, the actual math. Like, how deep in the weeds do these people get into here?
The smaller peer group, MSP owner gets into, does anyone know how to make this report work in my PSA or my RMM or this piece of automation? Because they're living in it, right? They're working in their business. They're still part of the technical talent, if you will, right? The larger ones, they don't get involved with that at all. They're going to be at a higher level and say, hey, I was looking over my P&L compared to yours, and I see that we are consistently 3 to 5% below you in net profit. I really want to sit down and talk through your P&L with you to go through it. So they're getting to that level. Sometimes in group, sometimes one-on-one. It just depends,
How much, like, I assume there's things like, hey, I'm having an employee issue, or how do I handle commissions this quarter because we're down, or hey, I might be in a legal issue and want to take your opinion. Like, everything's fair game. At what point is there
much deeper than that? So the employee issue is probably what's talked about the most, right? Again, what I said earlier, most of us we're not formally trained in managing people. We've just acquired an ability somewhere along the line to fake it well enough to keep growing our company. And we pat ourselves on the back every day and tell ourselves how great we are at managing people, until we realize we're actually not that good at it, because we don't even know what we're doing. We just know we can coach, we can teach a little bit, but we don't know how to truly manage people. So that's talked about a lot. But I will tell you that I've had everything from, okay, now that I'm on this call without my business partner, I need to talk about how to end this professional relationship of 25 years and either buy him out or have him buy me out, because my partner doesn't want to go where I want to go, or I don't want to go, so we get into that level. I had someone a few years back now, he transferred majority ownership of his company to his wife. to take advantage of woman-owned business. And then the marriage fell apart. And can you imagine negotiating now to figure out how to save the business? And it was rather deep conversations, at times, and they get personal. They do get personal with people, whether it's, I just had to let someone go as my first employee. I can't believe I finally did it, to something like that, to just basic financials. Should I borrow money because here's what I've got going on, right? Or how do I manage my debt?
So as the facilitators trying to make sure everybody gets value out of this, how much is it managing the personalities in the group versus the actual business talk?
I got to look at who the attendees are now and see if any of my members are on here. It's 50-50 in fairness. I was going to tell you it's 90% personalities, but that's not fair. It feels that way sometimes, that it's 90% personalities. No, it's the business conversations are pretty deep. It's a facilitator's job to make sure that everyone's paying attention, giving everyone else their just due, and also sharing. Not everybody opens up right away. And a few years ago, we had a member. He was in our first peer group. Month in and month out, would start every conversation with, "Things are great. Don't really have that much to share. Let me tell you what's going on." Never really looking for input. And finally, one day, someone, not me, I was a facilitator, said, "Hey, tell us where you suck." And I swear it was like he was hitting a head with a 2x4. He went, "Oh, okay." And he started telling about all his problems. And I'm going, is that all I got to do? Because from now on, that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to go there. Everyone's different. They open up at different levels, and you do have to manage that along the way.
So I have a question that came in.
Yep.
So it said, Steve spoke of educating the customer on getting greater value from a product, but vendors tend not to reward that. They reward volume and dollar sales. So how should you play? Are you actually concentrating on the customer? Or are you actually concentrating on your vendor? I guess, where's the balance in between the two?
First off, Brent's 100% right that vendors don't necessarily reward you for educating your clients, but they do reward you for the volume of business you're doing. And if you don't educate your clients, they'll jump ship as quick as you change RMM tools, right? Which we know MSPs change tools way too quick, instead of just staying the course on things. So I think you have to balance that. I've always believed that you cater to your customers. Everything you do, you cater to your customers, but you do so with an eye on what makes sense for the overall good of my company, right? As a provider. And then you manage the vendors. I think that's somewhat changing too, though. You look at some of the companies out there, they understand that education is part of it, and they make themselves available. They may not reward you or pay you to do the training, but they make themselves available to provide collateral material, to maybe do some of the trainings for you. I think the better vendors are out there and leading on that.
Is there any strength in numbers, right? Do these MSPs in your peer groups get together and approach a vendor as a group? Does that work at all?
They try to. They try to put pressure on us to do that for them, if you will. And we remind them that we're not a buying consortium. There are buying consortiums out there. We're not a distributor where we might be able to do that to a vendor and put pressure on a vendor for better price. So as you know, you're one of our sponsors. As you know, if someone from MSP Ignite raises an issue, you're going to look at it maybe differently than if it was just one small MSP somewhere that raised the issue. Now, I'd hope you'd treat them both the same anyway, but you're still going to say, "Oh, if I drop the ball on this, they're going to go back to their peer group and talk about it. And now I'm going to have 10 more people that are going, oh, I don't know if I want to go there." Right. So, but we do not band together to do that.
Just the natural ebb and flow.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, right, going through the rest of the year, I think you have you do things quarterly, I think, from people meeting up, right, virtually or in person, however it works. So going through the rest of the year, what are the things that you're going to ask your peer group members to focus on to get through the rest of 2020, right? I mean, we're still in a kind of uncertain future, right? Like we're hoping 2021's like a little bit back to, like 2020 got erased a little bit. I'm just curious, like, what are the topics that you're going to be concentrating on? What are the things that the homework that you're going to ask these guys to do so that they can better find themselves out of the rest of the
Great question. And we really meet monthly. So our groups meet monthly. The in-persons are quarterly, if you will, or the longer meetings because they're virtual now. But we do meet monthly with our groups. We've been focusing really all year on planned approach to account management. So it lends itself to what's gone on this year, right? More conversation with the client, more budget planning, both with the client and behind the scenes. So not just budget planning, but forecasting of where's the client going. It shouldn't be a surprise when a client says to you, we're cutting 20% of our workforce. Normally, in this time, it's a little different, right? You should be involved with conversations early on because that means a change in the use of technology. You shouldn't be surprised when the client says we're opening up a new office tomorrow, right? Shame on the client for not sharing, but still, shame on you for not keeping that door open of communication. So for us, 90% of what we're pushing is communicate with your client more often and at a higher level. Not just so many people who have the QBR term in their heads, right? I have to go do quarterly business reviews and tell the client how many tickets we had over the last quarter and what our response time was, right? No client cares. Like none of them care. No. When was the last time a client said to you, how many tickets have we opened for you in your company? They just don't, right? What they care about is that they're being productive, that their people are supported, that they're moving forward, that you're bringing new technologies to the forefront, that you understand where they're trying to go as a company, and therefore you're looking at technologies. We had a member out in Arizona. He had an agricultural client, and he went to meet him just for business review, strategic review, sit and have a conversation. And he said, forget technology. Let's just have a conversation about where you're going. He said, well, in agriculture, living here in Arizona, our biggest problem is what you might think it would be, water. If you can help us with our water problem, I'll pay anything. Well, this guy took it to heart and said, okay, let's talk about your water problem. And he learned about irrigation, and he learned about measuring water and how to optimize plant growth and all these things. This is an MSP that did this. He went back to his customer and he showed him what he found, and he found it through a distributor, by the way. And he showed him what he found, and the customer said, how much is this going to cost me? And he said, $1.5 million. But your ROI is in 9 months. And the guy said, okay, let's do it. So it's about, you're muted there, George.
I was going to say, it's a pretty good story.
And when you think about it, listen, we're not going to get $1.5 million project from every client, right? Some clients, their whole operating budget isn't that. But if we talk to them more and stop making it about technology and just say, talk to me about your business. What's your biggest business challenge, right? That's what I say to everybody in what I do is tell me what your biggest business challenge is, right? And it's different today than it might be tomorrow. We always have to look at that.
If an MSP were to come to you and say, I'm hesitant having this conversation with my customer, I've just never had this before, would you get into that conversation with them and their customer to help kind of coach them through that? How does that work?
The one thing that I always say is within reason, I'll do anything to help an MSP. This is the market I've been in my whole adult life, right? So whether they were a member or not, quite honestly, if someone came to me and said, I listened to you have this conversation about talking to a customer purely from a business perspective, and I'm nervous about having it, I'd love you to join me in a meeting with a client, I'd say, sure, let's do it. Now it'd probably be on Zoom today, so it's easy for me to say yes, right? But I would do it. It's when we were doing the town hall meetings early on in quarantine, you were on a lot of those calls. I started coaching people to say, You need to do this with your customers. Have a weekly or a bi-weekly call with your customers just to collaborate on what's going on. And if you're not sure how to do it, reach out to me and I'll host it for you. I'll just do it. You know how many of those requests I got during those first 3 months? If you were going to guess, zero.
Zero. Really?
Not one. Not one. We had some of our members do it, but they felt they were comfortable because they were in peer group doing it. But I had nobody ask me to host. I had someone ask me to join, and I jumped on the call, and the person running the call wasn't on when I jumped on. It was just like some of his customers, he fell off or had a problem or whatever, and all of a sudden I'm on with a bunch of strangers, and they don't know who I am because they're just going, "Oh, are you one of his customers too?" And we just started. And when he came back, we had a whole business conversation going on. But that was the only one I was on.
That's an interesting situation. So, that being said, all things considered, what's your gut feeling on the industry? You know, like going into next year, like I think 2019 was a really good year for a lot of companies. I think 2020 was, everybody had a lot of, positivity going into it before it all hit. Would you, like, I know some people are like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I want out, right? In a combination of this versus all the cybersecurity stuff that's happening that just seems to be out of control. Like, would you recommend that people who aren't in this business get into this business at this point?
I would have never recommended people that are not in this business come into this business for a lot of different reasons. Mostly the headaches that we've all gone through being in this business. I actually think our industry remains strong. I do think the bottom's going to fall out a little bit of the MSP market, but it's also going to be picked up by the fact that with unemployment what it is, we're going to get a whole new crop of 1- and 2-man shows with a ton of expertise in one area or another that hang a shingle out and start going into business in a variety of ways. So that's going to create both competition and opportunity, because some of those people will succeed quickly. Most of them will not, and they'll struggle to feed their families and say, what did I do? And maybe they're an acquisition, an easy acquisition, right? A low cost acquisition to just bring on expertise. But while the world's changing, I think being in a technology business, the world changing is a good thing because it will always change with technology involved. Now, if you're still banking on on-prem equipment and very little cloud, that's a different story.
Do you see, like, even within your peer groups or just your peer group members talking, is there a lot of reinforcement and fast forwarding on M&A and acquisitions and merging, or is that just news?
I think it hasn't. I don't think it's changed at all. I think it's exactly where it was in January today. I think some people in the industry are thinking they can gobble up small guys easier and cheaper than maybe before because they'll be hurting, but there also won't be a ton of value there. So I don't think that's going to change much. But I think the M&A market's still strong in the industry. I don't think it's any stronger than it was in January, but I do think it's still strong. We're seeing valuations come out in the same place that they were pre-quarantine.
Really? Same as 2019?
Yep.
Okay. Got a question just came in from Brent. On-prem is not dead if your customer is the doomsdayer, right? I mean, listen, there are certain industries, Steve, that cloud just doesn't work, right? Manufacturing's been one. There's just people that are on older technology, like still doing old-fashioned. I call it the J.C. Penney's cursor in the corner, right? I mean, so to some degrees, the cloud doesn't work for a lot, but the truck roll is still the most expensive thing in the business, right?
Right. 100%. Listen, I want to point out that you skipped Brent's one comment, and I think it's important to say I'm not the oldest person on this call, and I'm happy about that.
Hey, I wasn't putting any dates out there. All right. So big picture, zooming out, what are the top 3 things that you would recommend? Whether it's advice, whether it's just gut feeling because you've been around and you know what works, what doesn't. What are the top 3 things you would recommend, suggest to MSPs to work on moving forward?
I'm going to add more because I think the top 3 are all the same. kind of like, in real estate, top three things are location, location, location. I think most small businesses, of which all our MSPs fall into, they actually don't understand their financials anywhere near as detailed as they should. And so I'm going to tell you that that's the top three is financials, financials, financials. And I don't mean just I look at my P&L or I know the bank's okay and I have cash flow. I mean on a granular level, looking at client by client, not only am I profitable, but how profitable am I month in and month out, to where they get to the point where they understand trends, right? Because the key is to understand the trend of any client relationship. Very rarely does it change like that. I mean, it happens, but very rarely. Usually, if we look back, we go, oh my God, I've seen this happening if I was only looking, right? And so we're big believers. It's something we push hard to all our MSPs, is really understanding profitability, including how much labor you put into each client to support them. And that's, we go back to that same problem that we always have. My people don't put their time in accurately. They don't put it in promptly, Well, guess what? Unemployment's at record highs. Get new people. I mean, now's the time to really put your foot down on timely time entries from all technical resources, all sales resources, all admin resources, so that you know where your profits are. And when we circle back to that conversation about verticals, suddenly you find out, for example, for me, nonprofits was the biggest vertical I had. Most people go, nonprofits, they're cheap, they don't spend money on upgrade. Well, if you learn how to work with nonprofits, and I'm not talking about the local Little League, I am talking about the church and up, if you will, in size. United Hospice facilities, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, that are big organizations. Go to United Way, and just every United Way organization they service other nonprofits. Get into a market you understand, and then you can keep going and go deeper. But you asked for three. So even though I cheated.
Financials. I got it. Monday.
I'm going to go back to that whole proactive thing. I don't think business owners in this industry think proactively. They do when it comes to support. They don't when it comes to their business. What's your account management plan? What's your business development plan? What's your financial plan? Those would be my three, and how you're managing those.
No, fair enough. So, last thing, football this year. What do you think? Giants, Eagles? What do you think the NFC East?
That was just not fair. Well, according to everything I'm reading, the Giants look phenomenal. Of course, there's been one practice with pads, and they're in a classroom most of the time, but they look phenomenal. If I'm being fair, teams like the Eagles and the Ravens that are somewhat stable and bringing back most of the same people probably are going to have the best chance of having a good season.
Well, for whatever it's worth, your new head coach used to go to my high school.
He looks like he's the real deal, but who knows? That doesn't mean anything for this year.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. It'll be an interesting year. I might be inviting you to Philadelphia, because it looks like there's no fans in the stands for the season up there.
So I can come down just to watch somewhere and not worry about getting beaten up in the parking lot.
You won't get beat up. You'll be with me. Maybe I'll bring Jackson down. I'll bring you down. We'll have the Northeast ensemble.
There you go. I'm in.
Right on.
Sounds
Steve,
good.
Where do people find you? How do they connect with you? Are you still running town hall calls? Like, where do they kind of get an idea of what's going on in your world?
The best thing to do is to go to our website, msp-ignite.com. Connect with us there. If you fill out the form, even if you don't want to talk about being in a peer group, you get on our mailing list. We have webinars every month. We have two types of webinars every month. One is vendor sponsored through our consultant base, and one is something we call Secure Outcomes. It's really how we focus on the cybersecurity market for our members. So we're happy to get you signed up for that. Thank you, George.
No, absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for watching. This session was recorded. There was like a volcano of good stuff that came out of this session. And frankly, not just because me and Steve like to talk a lot, but also because we talk to a lot of other people. So it kind of, Steve, probably you more than me, but you kind of get the idea of what's actually happening out there, which I think sometimes it's better to learn from others than to go the hard way every time yourself. So appreciate you, Steve, for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching. You'll find this on mspinitiative.com. You can go back, rewind, fast forward, do whatever you want. Don't forget, Tuesdays, Thursdays, 1:00 Eastern time. This is the last week of our road trip tour. So we interviewed a lot of MSPs on the road. You're going to be able to see those interviews online, kind of get a feel how everybody in each of their little areas are doing. I think you'll find it super interesting. Steve, catch you on the flip side. Go Eagles.
I'm never going to go there, but George, have a good one. Safe trip home.